to, when you're speaking, I'll have to mute my microphone. Okay, so let me welcome everyone here today for one of our guest lectures sponsored by SKEMA Ventures, and also thinking about entrepreneurship, and also for the class who are looking at, in strategy, who are looking at the strategy of a variety of different airlines. So we're lucky to have one of my good friends and colleagues, Olfa Hamdi, here, who is the former CEO of Tunisia Airlines, or Tunisia Air, who has an exciting story about that, but also prior to that and continuing beyond that, is also a very successful entrepreneur. So she's going to talk to us about her experience there, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about some of the questions that you might have about your airlines as you work on the strategy for the airlines, and also some general questions that you can take. At any point in time, please feel free to interrupt. If you're in the room to speak, you'll have to come up to the computer to speak, and take questions at the end. So I'm going to let Olfa give her background briefly herself. Because if I were to do it, I would probably go on for 15 minutes. So much to say. So Olfa, let me introduce you here and say welcome. And you may want to slide back an inch or two from your camera just to get your forehead in.
Oh, I need to slide back? Okay.
And back.
Is it better now?
There you go. Okay. Much better.
Okay, because I don't see myself, so I'm not sure.
There you are. Okay, so Olfa. So again, let me just say welcome and glad you're here.
Well, thank you so much, Dr. Weisberg, for the invitation, and welcome everybody, and thank you for your interest, I guess, in learning about my background, my story, but also Tunisair from a strategy standpoint. Somehow I think there is an echo when I speak, so okay, it's gone now. Okay, it's all good. Well, a little bit about my background. I'm an engineer by training, so I actually have 2 Masters of Science. The first one is in engineering. The second one is in management of large construction projects. The first one is from École Centrale de Lille in France, and the second one is from the University of Texas at Austin. I also hold a law degree in state investor disputes arbitration from Texas Law School. I first started my career, I actually started as a researcher within the Construction Industry Institute, where I worked on inventing a methodology for predictable project delivery. So that's the methodology how that enabled me by publishing it, and it became actually a best practice in the petrochemical industry. That's how I ended up getting my actually extraordinary ability category immigration here to the US. I worked in corporate America primarily as an auditor of mega projects. So I audit projects at the time they're supposed to be funded, a full investment decision, FID. And I tell projects whether they're will be on time and on budget. So that's my initial background. After that, I left corporate America. I started my own company, Concord Project Technologies. Before that, I actually started multiple other projects, which ended up failing. And that's, when Dr. Weisberg, and thank you for mentioning that I'm a successful entrepreneur, but the truth is success comes after failures. So we only see the successful part. As an entrepreneur, primarily working on capital projects, construction projects, and for a long time have been involved with Tunisia, my home country, in civil society, and giving back basically also, and then finally have had the great actually chance and privilege to serve as CEO and President and CEO of Tunisair for about 6 weeks actually. 2 months before that, so 2 months in preparation, and then 6 weeks in actual tenure. And I'll be talking to you about this. Yeah, I'd like also to mention that I started a Center for Strategic Studies on Tunisia, which is an organization that focuses on looking at the economic reform in Tunisia as well. So if it's okay with you, I would like to start sharing my screen. I actually prepared some notes to help drive the conversation, share with you some of the journey and the thinking from a strategy standpoint, and then looking forward to your questions and your feedback. So I'm going to start sharing my screen. And let me know if you see my screen. Do you actually see a red slide?
Yes.
Okay, yes. Excellent. Okay. So the very
Yeah.
first thing I wanted to give you some background about the company. So Tunisair is a 74-year-old company. It's a national carrier, state-owned, with minority shares by actually other public organizations in Tunisia and Air France. Tunisair is not just an airline, it's actually composed of a number of companies, but they're not formally structured in a holding company or a group. The airline does obviously transport passengers, it's an airline. In addition to that, it owns a company that does 98% of all airport handling operations in Tunisia. It's actually owns a company that does 100% of airline catering operations in Tunisia. And it owns a company that does
some technology here. Could
sorry?
you repeat? We're having some technology here. Can you repeat?
Yes.
You started to talk about the company and pick up from there again.
Do you see my screen with the background slide?
We're good now. Yes, we're good now.
Okay. So I'm going to start from the beginning. Okay. So it's a 74-year-old company. It's state-owned. Minority shares include minority shares by other state-owned companies and Air France as the only private minority shareholder, although it's not an active shareholder, actually. Tunisair is an airline, yes, but it actually owns many other companies, and they're not structured in a holding company. So it actually owns a company that's called Tunisair Handling that does 98% of airport handling operations inside the country. It owns a company that does 100% of airline catering operations in Tunisia. It owns a company that does 90% of all aircraft maintenance operations in Tunisia. And it owns another also small airline company called Tunisair Express, which with a number of ATRs does short haul flights, basically, and internal flights. It also owns a few other companies that do training for pilots and some of the Airbus related trainings. It also owns a company that does a multiple travel agency type of works or certain products associated with the pilgrimage services and other services as well. There's about 8,000 employees. The airline owns 28 airplanes and transports in a good year, about 4 million passengers. Most of the market that Tunisair serves is based on what we call visit friends and family passengers. So primarily Tunisians abroad that come to Tunisia to visit friends or family. And then the second group of customers are tourists. So tourism remains a key contributor to the activity. And it's a company that has a historically well-developed network in Europe, one of the most successful, actually, North African airlines with a strong network in Europe. It started a newly developed network in Western Africa, which started to actually be quite profitable. And it's also a company that suffered for the last decade with a deteriorating quality and reputation, which is literally one of the worst. Has a good safety record, actually a very good safety record until very recently. But then it's actually one of the worst ranked airlines in the world when it comes to regularity of flights and quality of services. So, spent about 2 months prior to accepting the position, just doing the analysis, talking to people, understanding more about the airline industry, and which is a fascinating industry, which is a really, really fascinating industry. And then I had an approach when I took the company, which is to allocate my time basically on 4 kind of groups of activities. as CEO. So number one was the emergency, what I call emergencies, and these are the fires. And so these include operational difficulties, financial difficulties, and lawsuits that are literally imminent, with threat to, take the company down. The second group of activities included the diagnosis or the audit. So in that, I actually used my audit experience, audit in mega projects, and I did a sort of a accelerated audit of the last 10 years of the company. And I defined what I call a strategic errors. So there were so many problems in the company. I just said, you know what, I'm gonna just take a look at any major decisions or initiatives or anything that has an impact of $10 million or more on the financial performance of the company. And so that's kind of like trying to prioritize where my attention goes. And then the third part of the audit is stakeholder analysis. And it's an informal way of understanding where everybody fits into the company. The third group of activities in my approach included the revival plan definition. I actually intended to do this around the second quarter of 2021, but when I joined the company due to COVID, actually, the company lost 70% of its revenue in 2020, and most of its revenue relied on passengers traveling in and out of France to Tunisia, and then those from Western Africa transiting through Tunisia to Europe. By the end of January, so 3 weeks after I actually took the company over, France closed its borders, and then Tunisia put sanitary restrictions due to COVID that basically prevented and killed all of our revenue, both from the passengers transiting from Africa and the ones coming in and out of France. So what that did is that in February 2021, the company had virtually no income, almost no income. And so for that, we needed absolutely the government to intervene. And so that's when I actually accelerated the definition of the revival plan definition, because to ask for the government for money, you need to justify what you're using it for. And it was an element where I actually just would not ask for money to pay for salaries. So that in a way accelerated this. And then 10% of my time was spent on developing the vision, and I'll talk more about that. So over the next few slides, I'll actually have one slide per those 4 categories, explain what it is, and finish the presentation with some key thoughts. So in terms of the emergencies, this is included those key activities for a company of that level. The first thing was really renegotiate payment plans with key vendors, because when you're a company and you're literally at the bankruptcy stage, you have that with key vendors, a lot of international vendors, and not paying is actually a lot of liability. So renegotiating that on the basis of a new revival plan, that was the first one. The second one was addressing major lawsuits. So you can imagine, as a company with a lot of issues, you end up with people suing the company. And so some of those lawsuits were imminent. So they needed to be addressed. The third emergency was actually, we had a lot of airplanes that were quite good. So 6-year-old airplanes and so on, they were just on the ground due to maintenance issues, just not repaired. And so increase in labor productivity, going on the ground, motivating the crew, which a lot of them are unionized, trying to establish actually a planning system, and then also solve a lot of the roadblocks into some of those airplane repairing. So ordering of repair pieces, logistics issues, and all of these kind of things. So getting that back on track, that was an emergency. The other emergency was actually just getting the financial data out. So the airline actually is listed in the Tunisian stock market, but for many reasons, and including bad governance, corruption, and so on, the airline stopped publishing its financial data over the last 3 years, which is the first time in its history, which is a very bad element, because you can't run a company without looking at your statements virtually. So that was an emergency that needed to be addressed. The fifth emergency was actually, it's a very old company and it's a state-owned company. So it actually has one of the key features of old-fashioned companies, which is being siloed departments that needs to be integrated. So, and the primary objectives for the emergencies is to improve flight regularity, which comes from the infrastructure problems and the siloed departments inside the airline, and then improve the data collection toward various data. So whether that's strategy building, for the purpose of building the strategy or the purpose of publishing the financial data and so on. And then the sixth emergency, I believe was an emergency, is actually communicating with employees directly on the ground, which has been something that is quite a cultural change, because most the state-owned companies in Tunisia don't communicate with employees directly. They actually communicate with the union, and the union communicates with employees. And so doing that direct communication with the employees, I felt was an emergency, because we needed the employees to be able to advance the agenda. So these are the emergencies that took a lot of the time, and took, I guess, a sort of an average workload of about 19 hours a day. So that was the first one. The 30% of my time was spent on the audit, putting together actually a sort of task forces inside the company to be able to do these audits and running all of those task forces. The first one was analyzing the 2010-2020 performance. I actually had to look at the entire decade for multiple reasons. The first one is that the airline has not been profitable for an entire decade, although it has sat on a very profitable and comfortable market share, leading the Tunisian market share. So I needed to understand that. And then also Tunisia has had a revolution in 2011, which led to the change in the political and legal system. So we have a new constitution, and because Tunisair is a state-owned company, then all of its systems and its governance was based on the first constitution. So laws-wise and governance-wise. And so I needed to take a look at what kind of governance have we had over the last 10 years, which led to the situation of the airline right now. I also needed to understand what's the break-even number. I mean, that's the magic number. How many passengers does the company need to transport every year for it to break even? And that would tell you basically whether the airline could be saved or not. As I mentioned, I looked at the key strategic errors and I defined them based on $10 million threshold. I mean, there are many others, but again, you've got to figure out your priorities. The fourth one is establish new governance rules, actually start, changing the governance rules to avoid some of those errors. And that's when you step into the reform and you're no longer into the auditing part. And then analyze past behavior of stakeholders. So I actually looked at prior decisions by the government and the board decisions. So all of the logs and the minutes of the board and the ministerial decisions around Tunisair. Looked at the union relationship. So all of the agreements between former management and the union, especially on salaries, hiring, productivity, all of these things. And then obviously our client relationship as well. So by that time, I actually defined 2021 has to be a pivot year. So we're not moving from point A to B. We're actually just changing direction, because the company is going into the wrong direction. So we're going to sit where we are, but we're going to need to pivot. And for me, the pivot meant earning back the trust of our stakeholders. So we have a trust issue, a credibility issue, crisis. So we need to get back the trust of our customers. And so it's a public opinion, it's equality, it's all of that. We need to get back the trust of the shareholders, and that's primarily the government. And then we need to get the trust back of our vendors and partners. And then as part of the trust of the shareholders, actually, because there is a minority shares inside Tunisair that are traded in the stock market. And so even though they're a minority, I felt these were the most reliable in a way, or like most transparent or true reflection of where the market is. So these were the shareholders I actually paid most attention to, and I would say that might have been a strategic error actually. So, focusing on the stock market versus the government as a primary shareholder. So with trust basically in the possibility of success, then we can build a new future. That was the whole story that I had within this vision in a way. This takes me to my revival plan, which I ended up formulating by the second week of February, and started, presenting or trying to present to the government. And in the government, I mean the executive leadership and the legislative branch, because in Tunisia, the government actually is not elected. It actually comes out of parliament, and parliament is elected. So the very first thing is to change the legal status of Tunisair. Combine all of those, affiliates, because, I found out that a lot of affiliate companies were actually having their own agenda somehow, and their own strategy, countering basically Tunisair as an airline. And so they were favoring competition versus Tunisair. And I know the whole debate about the monopoly or and all of those elements. And so I said, we need to form a holding company. We need to regroup all of those affiliates. We need to change board memberships. And I did that in the first month. And then we need to change the legal status of Tunisair from a regular company to what we call an offshore related company. And so in Tunisian law, there is the status, if you're an offshore company, so a company that serves clients that are primarily abroad, and you make a lot of your revenue from abroad, then you get this special status which relieves you from tax burdens and so on. So I thought, okay, this is the first thing we need to do. The second thing, and all of those are not in order of chronology, it's really a whole, plan. But the second element is to go transparent as much as possible. And so publish financial statements, involve all stakeholders in understanding the problem, and then actually change our accounting system from Tunisian dinar to USD, or, hard currency, basically. That way, because Tunisia is suffering from a major inflation problem. And when you're running a company that is competing internationally in a highly inflation economy, then you tend to see actually, you have to understand the impact of that. And by doing that, we actually ended up understanding even better our financial data. The third element is increased productivity. And so basically lay off about 33% of employees. And that's very simple. I mean, we could not, basically either lay them off or ask the government if they want to keep them, within the airline, and then we need to figure out a plan on how to use them. And so repurpose them, basically figure out a new business model to do them, or literally my suggestion was that we lay them off, and then if you're subsidizing them, so why don't you just put that in the social system, social security system, and cover them in that part. To increase productivity, we needed to get out of the handling operation business in airports. We have a monopoly there, and it's one of the least productive segments inside the company. It's also the segment where we have a lot of the quality issues and corruption issues as well. And so I thought that trying to improve that, especially as Tunisia is meant to open up with open sky agreements, there is no way of keeping that segment of the business has to be competitive, and it's better we get out of it right now and get the most value out of it. And then revise the salary structure inside Tunisair, and I can speak about that later on. The other segment of the revival plan is to actually complete our previous fleet renewal plan. So we actually engaged in a fleet renewal plan with Airbus 15 years ago, which never got completed. And so I said, we need to complete that this year, which helps reduce our fleet age down to 13 years average, sell some of our old airplanes, and engage with a new fleet plan on the basis of 1.2 million passengers every year until 2024, and then initiate a new network analysis on the basis of a new vision, and then start negotiations with both Airbus and Boeing equally, actually, to be able to figure out the best plan forward. The fifth element of the revival plan is to move all regular flights to a new existing airport in Tunisia. So Tunisair, basically, all of its flights are based in primarily about 85% out of the Carthage airport in Tunis, the capital. So this airport is a very old airport. It's actually an airport that's not fit for transit. And what Tunisair has done, especially with COVID, since COVID, is that we started getting more revenue and trying to serve transit passengers. And because the airport is not fit for transit, it's not even actually authorized to do transit, quality was very bad. Managing COVID actually restrictions was not feasible. And the airport operations, were literally, objectively speaking, we could improve. I actually was able to improve with the team. We were able to improve flight regularity by about 8 to 10% in a month, but that we reached the limit of it. Like you could tell it's an infrastructure problem, the regularity of flights. We can't improve it. And so there is this whole new airport actually we have in Tunisia. It's about 1.5 hours away from the capital. It has the capacity of up to 5 million passengers. It's a transit airport, but it's actually run by a foreign company. So it's not run by Tunisair in terms of handling operations. And so I said, we need to move all of our regular flights right now, which would be possible, especially that no flights are happening. So let's, with COVID, let's do it right now. The second part of the revival plan, and all of this has to happen in 2021. So as you can see, it was a lot of work. Revisit our commercial program, which focus more on transit passengers, open more intracontinental flights, so flights to Libya, to Algeria, to Western Africa, serve basically African transit. Focus on connecting to major hubs only, so even in our network in Europe, slow down on our, or completely actually get out of the non-profitable lines, and then focus on connecting to hubs. So the Paris, Amsterdam, Istanbul, all of the major hubs. And then build basically a product commercially that's COVID safe, for COVID safe traveling. Focus on profitability only when it comes to key networks. And then for any lines that we have open for political reasons, then I define basically a system where they get to be subsidized instead of them being merged, even in our accounting analytical system, basically. Third, finally, enhance the quality to achieve customer satisfaction, because without that, we really can't continue to be in business anymore. So for me, regularity of flights was non-negotiable. It's a math problem. Like it's not. It has to happen. Focus on quality flights, so premium flights, no more charter flights. The low-cost flights, none of the low cost. We don't have cost discipline, so we can't do low cost. To do low cost, you need to be as good as an airline as the non-low cost. So if you're not good in regular flights, you can't be good in low cost flights. Move all of our low cost charter based flights to our affiliate called Tunisair Express, and make that company, because it's a really a company with low overhead costs. So make that company specialized in low cost and charter flights. And then finally, increase the capital. So whatever the government is going to put in terms of investment in this revival plan, ask all other shareholders to either match that or they sell their shares in the stock market. And because Tunisair has this emotional brand connection with the Tunisian people, that's like we're looking about 3 million customers. We could actually raise capital. We go public, more public, basically. We sell more shares to the Tunisian public, and that would increase our base of shareholders and increase our transparency. All of this is part of a vision. The vision is that 2021 to 2024, this COVID period, is just, be this national carrier Tunisians can be proud of, which can translate later on in them buying stock in the airline, achieve the best quality serving the Tunisian market, and be that airline that actually is the airline that is the biggest, I guess, marketing or travel agency of the country, sell the image of this new democracy and this company that is this new economy in a way. And then moving forward, 2024 to 2035, my vision was that for the airline is, the airline business is going to change overall. If you look at we're looking at the first electric commercial airplane to go in operation in 2026. We're looking at pilotless airplanes shortly. We're looking at airlines, even airline manufacturers, airplane manufacturers that are bleeding cash right now. So, and we know COVID is going to continue. So nobody knows really how how this business is gonna, whether the traditional airline business is gonna continue to be the same. So, my vision is that, okay, as we succeed in becoming this, well-managed, well-operated, high-quality, successful airline, then in that we actually use our strength to become this platform serving the African continent, which is the most growing, actually, economy over the next 2 decades. It's also the economy where 70% of the population is, younger than 35 years old. It's also an economy where the power of consumption is going to grow, and more travel is going to be required. And so be that platform serving the African continent using our geographical position. So in that means be another gateway to Africa, because, now Morocco is, RAM basically is playing that role, and they have made so much progress in that. So it's very difficult in a way to catch up with that. And then be the other gateway to Africa in a way. And so be basically this platform in which perhaps, other major airlines looking to extend their saturation. So Air France, KLM, Turkish Airlines, and so on, they all can be part, Emirates and so on, they all can be part of that. Become a driver of economic opportunities to Tunisia. Tunisia has a very good, actually, medical infrastructure, so that, which has been really attractive to African customers. So be the driver for that, actually, and work with those. Part of the vision also is to lead an intracontinental alliance. And so we actually even started talking to Ethiopian Airlines at the time around building this Northern Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa continental alliance, where we could bring in there multiple African airlines and build a product that is fit for the African customers, and connect cities where major airlines that are outside of the African continents don't go. The Air France, the Turkish, and they don't go in those cities. So maybe you could build a product for those, and then drive quality into the African market. So Tunisair has this history, actually, over the past 15 years of training other airlines in Africa in terms of maintenance, safety, like we did it in Mauritania. We've done it in Morocco, actually, Algeria, and so on. So all of these countries that have a lower education base, basically, we've provided that service to them. So the idea is to become that service provider through training, consulting, and leasing services as well, and then attract R&D to support the commercial electric airplanes coming up, and then the pilotless airplanes, which will need actually control towers that are different from our current control towers, which are still human-based. So build basically the basis for that for the Vision 2024-2035. Now, as you all know, I was actually fired. Some people like to call it dismissed. I'd like to call things the way they are. After a major confrontation with the union, which the union basically announced a national strike in Tunisair on Thursday, which ended up almost, they announced the national strike basically based on their refusal of my leadership in the company for many reasons. That national strike ended up actually putting more pressure on the government, and then the union, the head of the union basically said, unless she's fired, we're announcing a national strike across all sectors. And so the government had to let me go. That happened I would have to say that you can have the best strategy ever, you can have the right strategy, but these are the lessons learned that I would believe need to be in place. So state-owned companies are political entities, depending on the context in which they are. And you can take a look at other companies that state-owned companies that successfully got reformed. Other airlines, Canada Air, even Air France in a way, Renault, all of those companies. There is always a political context in which these state-owned companies are. And the reforms in state-owned companies are political decisions at the end of the day. And so it takes a lot of lobbying to do so. And if there is like one lesson learned, I would say from day one, I would have put together a team that all it does is just talk to the various entities from day one, just to maintain the relationship. I don't know if that would have worked, but I would say that's a lesson learned. So never underestimate the power of the context in which you operate. The second lesson learned is that priorities that we take for granted here in the Western world is, I'm a product of the American business school. So my priorities, like when I say customer satisfaction is a priority, we might actually need to, sometimes you need to rethink your own priorities. So think of your shareholder, right? Who's your shareholder? If the state is my shareholder in this case, which was the case, then does the state has the same priority as the shareholder of the state? So if the shareholders of the government are the people, but then we are in an environment where, politically speaking, you can have the people on the side of reform, but then no elections are close in sight, and so the government does not reflect that. And so the priority for the government is survival, and that's my shareholder. And so my priorities are not customer satisfaction or no. In this case, the priorities for the stake shareholder, and that's the government, is surviving. And that means building a plan where you just survive and maintain things the way they are at the lowest cost possible. That's the equation. So that was not my equation, but that was their equation. And so there is a disconnect there. I also would like to say that in relationship to, takes me to what's the role of the CEO in the strategy of a corporation, whatever it is. I think the CEO can make it or break it, but also the CEO has its own footprint on the strategy. So, there is this beliefs basically impact behavior, and behavior impacts results. That's the way it is, It's like, you're in an orchestra, the chief of the orchestra, what he does will, you can have the best musicians ever, but if you have the chief of the orchestra that's taken the group somewhere, you'll get a symphony of a certain type. So we can't actually disregard that. The other lesson learned is too much, too fast. So what is the speed at which a strategy gets implemented? And so I think the velocity of the implementation is something to be thought about. For me, I was driven by the financial data of the company. So for me, it meant the change has to happen first Q, second Q, 2021. I was not, that was not a negotiable thing for me. And then when I guess, when I saw that my shareholders are not going in that direction, I actually started to implement the change with the leeway and the power that I had. And that was too much, too fast, right? So I guess the question to ask in terms of strategy is always, how ready is this environment for change? So there is this book I actually read. I'm going to finish with this. Two things in a way. So I read this book, Beliefs, Behavior, and Results. This was like right out of law school, actually. I read this book, and it shaped a lot of the way I think about companies, and I advise, actually, this is an advice, I'd advise you to read it. But actually it shows, we tend to want to build our entire view of corporations based on top Fortune 500 companies. And Fortune 500 companies, they made it outside of a context where they actually impact the context. A lot of companies, they are a major influencer of their own context, of their own environment. Sometimes you find yourselves in companies where the environment is actually stronger than you. And so that's what I would like to invite you to think about overall is in terms of, is survival is actually a strategy. Reform and restructuring is a strategy, but also bankruptcy is a strategy. So, I made this, I think I made this, and again, some people tell me, why did you upset the system this much so quickly? I tell them it's the fault of Dr. Weisberg, because he mentored me for years, and in the way he taught me how to look at strategy from a point that's driven by understanding the context, but it's also from a point of understanding myself. And in that regard, I realized actually that at the end of the day, when it comes to this particular environment in which this company needed to be reformed, its strategy, based on its current shareholder, is not the one that I presented to you guys. And so I was actually the wrong fit for the job from that perspective. So all of this is, it was a great experience. I look forward to actually your questions and feedback and comments also. But I would like to actually finish with just one remark. When it comes to leadership, I would say experience is what makes us learn how to craft strategy. We can, try to think about it and study it as much as we can, but it's really by looking back that you're able to connect the dots in a way. So thank you so much.
Well, thank you, Olfa, for sharing this experience with us, a little bit about what you've seen and what you experienced in the environment, and what your role was and how the strategy fit or actually didn't fit, and a little bit about the CEO's role. I thought it was interesting looking at how you talked about the internal and external environment, very different between the two, and how formulating the strategy didn't consider some of the factors that you shared in the lessons learned. I know there are a lot of questions from some of the students, both about the airlines and also about your experience, and perhaps about some of your entrepreneurial experience elsewhere. So I'm going to tell the people who are at home, or I should say at school outside the classroom, to feel free to ask a question by unmuting your mic, or the people here in the classroom, if you have a question, to come on up to the mic and ask your questions. Questions? You have to come to the mic.
Hello.
Is it on?
It's on.
No?
Yes, you can take your mask off.
Okay. Hello, Mrs. Hamdi. Thank you for your talk this afternoon. My question is, what kind of advice would you give to an airline to prepare for the post-COVID era that is coming quite fast, I would say?
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Okay, we hear you now.
Okay.
Start.
No problem. So yeah, what kind of advice for an airline to prepare for post-COVID? So I think the very first thing is take a look back at your performance and figure out what you're really good at. So what's your natural and competitive advantage? So a natural competitive advantage for me is an activity or a destination or a market share that you have with the lowest investment possible. So, and focus on that. And to prepare for post-COVID is to actually recognize, in the airline business, is to recognize that we're not in post-COVID yet. We are in COVID, and it's gonna last for a number of years. And governments won't continue bailing out airlines. Shareholders will give up on airlines for at some point. And so the idea is to really focus on what you do best with the lowest cost and maintain that. I would say the second advice is that there is no way around safety. It was an important thing, of course, in airlines before. It's actually even more important now. So safety comes first. And it's not even an area that, is not, it's not. And then, depending on the airline, really, it's really to look at the, okay, sorry, there was an echo of my voice. So yeah, number one is do what you do best and let go of any unprofitable or even actually, investment somehow. The second part is to put safety first, and it's non-negotiable. And third part is be very strategic about your future. In every difficulty lies opportunities, and it is my belief that there are just segments of the airline industry where it can't be sustained. People have to go out of business. In other segments, in many other markets, in some areas, there are parts where that's still going to continue, and we will have to do that. So focus on those and be very strategic about where you invest moving forward. I hope I answered your question, but that's kind of like my.
Yeah, you did. Thank you.
Any other questions?
Coming up with a question. Okay.
Okay, thanks for the presentation. It was very interesting also to see your ability to give to analyze your activity and the hardest parts too. So my question is because my team, we are actually working on Tunisair, so it's quite interesting. How would have you managed your relationships with the unions and the government, knowing how it ended up in the end? So because it appears that they are the main stakeholders on working on your strategy for Tunisair.
That's a tough question. Actually, in 6 weeks, I had 9 meetings with the union. So when I think back to this, I think I don't think of what else I could have done. But, actually, to manage the political landscape, I think what I would have done differently is go to the shareholder of the shareholder. And so my shareholder, in terms of the government, their shareholders are the political parties. And I would have actually, it would have benefited me to go to the political parties directly from day one, which I did not do. So that's something that I think would have helped. With the union, I think honestly, with the union, I just don't see a way moving forward with this. Haven't had meetings. Look, there are, as I mentioned, that you have. So I'll give you a little bit of history. So if you look at the union's role in Tunisia and in state-owned companies. So Tunisair, for example, in the last 3 years, has had a CEO that was pretty much actually what we call actually weak leadership. So decision-making wise, he was sharing major executive decisions with the union. So it's not about negotiation about just labor. So the union actually got involved in decisions like strategy, bonuses, contracts, commercial products, marketing, all sorts of things. So it is actually, there is a term for it inside the company, which I found when I arrived there. It's called Cogestion. Tunisia, is also French speaking in addition to speaking Arabic. So Cogestion is like co-management between the union and management. And so inherently, I actually have a hard time doing that. I just don't believe in that. I don't believe in co-management. And so, because you're not a member of the board, so I don't believe in co-management. But when you have an entity that got access to power, because management is power, then if you take that back from them, then a clash is going to happen. And so that power play, in a way, for me to succeed, I needed the support of the government. But then the union in Tunisia is actually co-managing the entire state. So they're not just co-managing Tunisair, but they're actually co-managing the political landscape. And so in a way, I ended up, when you think about it, when you have the CEO of Tunisair, a state-owned company, now having a major disagreement with the head of the national union, you feel like, how come? But that's because there is this culture of co-management, which happens on a day-to-day basis, and it's accepted. So that's why I can say, I might not have been the right fit for the job when it comes to that, because at the end of the day, there are things, what we call maybe compromise, or things that you would change in your style to be able to do things. And that's what I learned about myself. And maybe this is Dr. Weisberg would tell me, you can adjust, think about it, get outside of the box, etc. I think I was unable to do that, and I have to just, mea culpa, I was just not into that. So
Great.
Can we change that? I don't know, another CEO.
Okay, great. We have another question here.
Hello, Ms. Olfa. So my name is Yassine. I'm Tunisian. I'm proud of what you did in your few days in Tunisia. So my question is basically like, if Tunisia open for the private investors, so would that help Tunisia go from the situation that is now?
That's a very good question. So the position of Tunisair right now is that it cannot open for private investment. That's because it is functioning as a black box. So, if you want to, for example, let's say you go, I'll give you an example. You guys, if you want to go and get a loan from a bank, they'll ask you for, your bank statements or pay stubs, right? Something like that. So it's the same thing for major companies. If you want to get investors, if you want to get lines of credit, they'll ask you for your financial statements. And because we're listed in the stock market, we should publish those. Well, there is this major issue inside Tunisair today, which is its financial statements have not been published for the last 3 years. And so, which is related to a corruption case. And so that, in addition to multiple other factors, cannot enable Tunisair to open for private investment or private equity in any form at this point. Because if you're an investor and you're injecting money inside the company, you want to know where your money is going. And so to open Tunisair for private investment, there is a lot of cleaning, in a way, a lot of good things that best practices that need to happen. And so to answer questions right now, even if that's a solution, Tunisair cannot do it with its current conditions. Reforms and transparency and restructuring and good governance has to happen anyway. The second part, when it comes to private investment, I know in Tunisia, a lot of people keep talking about Tunisair being acquired by another airline. So if you're like, it depends on which airline, right? So if you're an airline that is funded by, it's not driven by profit. So if you're looking, for example, at Emirates or Qatar Airways, so these are airlines basically that are that have a certain strategy. Their funding and their investment comes from the state primarily, their governments, which are oil driven, and then others as well. So these airlines, they might be interested, if, we've heard about that, might be interested. And it's not really about Tunisair specifically, it's about the potential for the gateway to Africa, so that's the value of the geographical location is bigger than the sum of the problems of Tunisair. But even with that, it is my belief that that's not even a possibility. However, here is my belief when it comes to opening to private investors. It is my belief that it's in the best interest of Tunisair to remain listed in the stock market, publish its financial statements, and open a portion of its shares to anybody to buy. That could be individuals in Tunisia. So, they go into the market, they buy shares, wherever. And that could be private funds, private equities, and other airlines as well. Why not? So my belief is that for Tunisair to succeed, it's not about being acquired by another company or acquired by a private entity. It's actually needs to be not acquired, but actually its shareholders need to be a group of shareholders, employees, for example, all sorts of things, and remain listed in the stock market. That's my belief. And that's one way of privatizing the company without actually, selling our soul in a way.
So expanding the base of shareholders rather than consolidating it into one. We have about 3 more questions, and so I'm going to see if we can squeeze them in with some quick answers. So I have first question here.
Hello. First of all, thank you for the talk. And when you were telling us about your strategy, I was thinking, whoa, it's flawless. Where could it have gone wrong? But because it's everything that we read in the textbook. But I think the point that you mentioned, that it's not what the owners wanted. And that I feel is a really interesting point. So do you think that if the ownership was majority private, would your strategy have worked in that case?
Yeah. There is this saying, I heard it somewhere in one of the classes before, culture eats a strategy for breakfast, so that's what it is. The culture of the shareholder ate my strategy for breakfast. If I don't think it's about private or public. I think it's because there are, I'll give you an example. Look at other success stories. Look at Ethiopian Airlines, even if it's struggling right now, but look at it in a different context. Look at, I'll take the example of Renault, Nissan Renault, which, Renault was state-owned. It had a lot of the productivity issues, the labor issues, all of that. And then it had a really aggressive and a tough, actually, restructuring plan. And but the shareholder was public. That's the state of France, actually. And they wanted the company to reform. Otherwise, it's gonna die, because you look at all of the other car manufacturing, they were doing well. So I think it's not a matter of private or state. I think it's a matter of that shareholder, their priorities at that context and time. That's kind of like, I think it's a timing issue with a priorities issue. That's my belief. So.
Okay, thank you. Next question.
Hello, thank you for your presentation. I have a question about your vision development. You said in our presentation, you talked about you wanted Tunisia to invest in the African markets to develop a network. So for you, which are or which will be in the next 10 years the key region in Africa that an airline should invest in? Thank you.
So, if you look at investment overall, let's say you open a line, let's say Tunis, Dakar, for example. On average, depending on, obviously that's not a rule, but a rule of thumb in a way, you need to invest in a regular flight for at least 18 months to start actually having a rate of filling the airplane, actually, that's a high rate, over 80%. Because people are, when you develop a line, you're trying to build a habit. You're trying to build, a market share in a specific environment, basically. So when we looked at the data of the past history in Tunisair, and I'm guilty of something around that. I actually looked at, in our Tunisair handling company, I looked at the handling operations of all airlines serving all airports inside Tunisia. And so I could tell, okay, if there is like a line, let's say Sfax Paris, done by another airline, in how much time they actually were able to fill their seats to up to 80%. And sometimes it's 2 months, sometimes it's 6 months, sometimes it's 18 months, depending on the destination. So that's how I came up actually with this view and looking at that data, and then looking at other airlines data as well, the Algerian, the Moroccan, and especially North Africa. I realized actually that with COVID right now, if you look at travel, the issue we're having with travel is when we cross borders. So when we cross continents, when we go from a visa space to another visa space, that's the change that keeps it's around countries, it's around boundaries, it's around sovereignty. And so when we look at the North Africa, we look at Africa overall as a continent, there is more and more need for actually intracontinental traffic. And there is more need into business-wise, actually, there are more demands for such an economy inside the African continent that are traditional. We know them actually in other continents like North America and so on, and Europe. So demand for healthcare is growing. Demand for education is growing. So these two sectors, healthcare and education, and then trade. So the three, healthcare, education, and trade, along with that space, the African space, which is a growing space. It's less, constrained than the Europe Schengen space or North America and so on. That growing space is a space where, with the history of Tunisair developing those lines, I saw an opportunity to actually invest in this over a period of 3 years. And so which airline to invest in? I don't know. All airlines are struggling. I think wherever you see an airline looking to connect its product with an economic high growing sector, that's an airline to invest in. So I mean, it's a long answer, but I hope it made sense somehow to you guys.
Okay, we have another question here. And then we'll take a few from the chat.
Okay. Hello. Thank you for your presentation. I have a question about flight regularity. I took many time to research, and I'm wondering, ensure 88% of flight regularity around 15 minutes. When you observe frequently delays that exceed 1 hour, do you think is that realistic? And my second question is about why open an airway between Canada and Tunisia when you consider that your market is located in Europe and Africa?
Yeah,
thank you.
Very good, very good question. So flight regularity, here's the thing. Any airline that cannot maintain over 88% flight regularity should go out of business. Okay, very simple. Because that's the if you look at the ranking of all airlines from regularity to 15 minutes, that has to happen. So, and also clients right now, customers in the airline industry, all of them, even those, even when, and I say even, because we have this tendency to think that there are customers that are less, they don't require as much quality as anybody else. That's not true. Everybody wants flights on time, and we struggle with that in Tunisia, but in a lot of African actually airports. So on your question about improving flight regularity, I say the objective has to be over 88%. If you don't do that, then that's a math problem, by the way. It's an equation with multiple variables that are impacted by many things. They're impacted by your aircraft readiness, by the allocation of your crews. It's impacted by the airport. It's impacted by the network, by the timing, by the logistics. It's impacted by many things. So that's the first one. Then, when you have problems, when you talk about flights late over 1 hour or over 3 hours, the 1 hour problem is still a problem, but think about it like as a pyramid, right? The base of your pyramid is your late flights of over 15 minutes. The second level of the pyramid is the flights late over 1 hour. And the third one is the flight late over 3 hours. The problem with flights late over 3 hours, in addition to losing customers and frustration and all of that, is that now by law, if you're serving, for example, the EU, there is a legal penalty of about $200 or even more per passenger for every flight late over 3 hours. And there are now actually even collection agencies that do the work of suing the airlines over those to get the money for their customers. And so not having late flights is a matter of surviving. It's a money thing, actually. Sometimes, you know, the penalty is more expensive than the flight ticket itself. So, I mean, I hope I explained a little bit on your question. So for me, flight regularity is just non-negotiable. It has to improve. Without it, we run out of business. You asked the question about Montreal, the line about Montreal. I just want to mention that quickly. So for Tunisair, number one, it's because actually we have a large community of Tunisians who live in Canada and in Montreal specifically. So it's really a good, it's a profitable line. So that's number one. Number two, the part of the vision is that we'll focus on the transit, but we need to maintain connection. For me, it was very clear with our A330s, we needed to maintain long haul connections. And that's one or two to North America, one to Asia, and one to Sub-Saharan Africa. And maintain those and have regularity on those and connect the four, sides of the world. That was the whole idea. So, okay.
Okay, let's take some questions from. Can you see the chat?
Yes.
Or I can read it.
Do I take the first one? Okay. What is the pros and cons of a state-owned company or even airline? Thank you. I'll say short answer to that. We could have an entire actually lecture about state-owned companies, but I think there are bad state-owned companies and there are very successful state-owned companies. I'll cite, for example, state-owned companies, in Scandinavian companies, especially the oil and gas ones, they're good companies, well managed. So it's really not about being state-owned. It's about your governance and practices and market and your strategy. So
okay, next one.
How can we manage to not focus on strategy on shareholders? How can we avoid the pressure that they can have, that they exert over the strategy? Very good question, because avoidance is a strategy, as a matter of fact. So you could actually choose to avoid and not engage, and that's a strategy. So no decision is a decision. No meeting is a meeting, And so, I would say it takes, I think shareholders. So you have shareholders and stakeholders. Sometimes your stakeholders can be more powerful than the shareholders. In this case, it was the case. So the union is a stakeholder, not a shareholder, but they were more powerful than my shareholder, which is the government, which is politically weak. So I would say the pressure is there. Diffusing the pressure, do it through many things: meetings, communication, leveraging as much power as you get, introducing sometimes another stakeholder into the game. I mean, there are all sorts of ways. I don't know, there is no recipe in a way, but
I'm going to suggest. I'm going to suggest that we skip to this last question here on the chat. The one, do you think your being young and a woman may have influenced your dismissal from the role? Are there other female top executives in public companies? Maybe you might want to broaden that question to a little bit. We just have about 2 minutes left about your experience as a woman and an entrepreneur.
So, I always have a hard time talking about that because I never think of myself, as a woman. Like the identity part, I tend to get my identity from my training, my experience, what I do. But, I think, in Tunisia, no, there are no other, I think that it's really about youth and experience rather than being a woman. In Tunisia, no, there are no other young women leading state-owned companies. It's the first time in, I think in history somehow. Tunisia today is going through, overall, I'll put this in the larger context. Tunisia is the median age is 32 years old, which is exactly my age. So my age is at the median population age. And it's a population, it's a 10 million population. A majority actually are youth, very well educated, because we have lived in a system that had public education has been a major investment of the former 3-4 decades of the government. And 10% of the population, if not more, have had exposure to a broad experience. So we ended up with a population that is with young population with a lot of ambition, a lot of desire for growth and risk taking, but with the leadership that comes from the older school and what we call the establishment. And so I would say my challenge was that it was a cultural challenge. What I considered as a risk-taking experience was considered by others as, even sometimes my surrounding. I mean, I had a lot of people who were just against me taking the position in the first place. They were saying, just, it's political suicide. Why do you do that? Change can't happen. All of those kind of things. So I think the women part is important. Yes, I mean, I always, maybe I'm not really focused on that, because I think Tunisian women and Tunisian men, we tend to have the same problems. So when you have the same problems, differences don't matter. We all struggle economically. I think the challenge was really, it's a generational cultural challenge. And as I said, culture eats strategy for breakfast. So, I think that's the part. So I hope I answered the question. But I believe, actually, I want to finish with this. I believe if we have more young leaders in major companies in Tunisia and in decision-making places, we can see more positive change happen, even with the mistakes. That's what we need, I think. Anyway.
Okay, well, we want to thank you for the time that you spent with us, and I will get in touch with you, see if maybe you're willing to speak with us at 4:30 this afternoon, and if you are, we'll talk to you about then, but we'll confirm that afterwards in this room in 1:40.
Yeah, 4:30. I actually have a meeting that ends at 4:30 exactly, so I might be a little, late. Like, give me a couple of minutes, but please keep me posted. I'd be happy to. And thank you, everybody, for listening and for your interest. Thank you.
We'll open that discussion just to general entrepreneurship in general. Okay, so again, thank you for your time. I know everyone wants to thank you.
Thank you all. Bye. And good luck. Good luck. Bye.